Welcome to A-Team Group's RegTech Summit Virtual Event 2020. We'd like to thank our platinum sponsors, SmartStream and Bureau van Dijk, our gold sponsors, the Derivatives Service Bureau, ACA Compliance Group, AWS Partner Network, Axiom SL, Capitec, Univista, Automated Intelligence, and Flaminem KYC Software, and our event partner, the UK Department for International Trade. Connect with your peers on the networking page, and if you have questions for our speakers, please use the comment function next to the live stream. Thank you for attending and enjoy the session.
Hello and welcome. My name is Andrew Delaney. I am President and Chief Content Officer at A-Team Group, and I will be your host for today. That's day 4 of our RegTech Summit Virtual. As those of you who have been with us throughout the week must have realized, I didn't attend the meeting where they decided at A-Team that we would not only go live with this event, but we would do it for 5 straight days. And I didn't get the memo. So here I am hosting on day 4 of 5, very much enjoying ourselves here, and I hope you're enjoying the event too. So today is day 4. Our theme today is improving KYC, AML, and financial crime compliance with RegTech. Everyone loves a bit of financial crime, and we've got a great crew, a great set of experts who are going to share their experiences, not of financial crime, but of how they deal with KYC, AML, and things like surveillance for financial crime. So again, a bit of a mix of formats. We've got a couple of videos, we've got a panel, we've got a keynote. So hold on to your seats, as they say. Okay, let's see. The quick reminder from me is to use a Slido to ask questions and vote in our polls. There will be chances to ask our experts any questions that come out of their presentations or discussions. So make sure you use Slido. The connection to Slido should be to the right of this video as you see it. And we'll also be running a few polls. So again, you get the chance to vote in the polls using Slido. So make sure you sign up for that. As always, a big thank you to our speakers and sponsors. Particular thanks go to today's sponsors, Bureau van Dijk and Flaminem. As I've said every day this week, I would like to remind you to visit the networking section, the sponsors section, try to enter a few prize giveaways. There's some great prizes on offer. This is all about connecting with the sponsors. It's these guys who support, make this event possible and free at the point of consumption. So I can't stress enough how much we need to show our appreciation. So if you can get to do that, that would be great. So I think on that note, enough from me. Let's get the show on the road. First up, we've got a RegTech startup elevator pitch from Tukitaki, who have a 1-minute video to showcase their offering. So I'll leave you with that.
Hi, I'm Abhishek Chatterjee, founder and CEO of Tukitaki. Today's AML systems fail to provide financial institutions a sustainable and a comprehensive AML risk coverage program, while siloed AML programs with limited information from peers fails to learn from the current environment. Tukitaki's federated AML program is powered by the Topology Repository Management and Automated Machine Learning module, which is able to effectively detect money laundering cases. A topology repository is a global shared federated storage of money laundering patterns sourced from financial institutions, regulators, and AML experts, while an automated machine learning engine is able to connect seamlessly to the federated storage and auto-drive itself to detect complex money laundering cases. Our approach in federated learning is a paradigm shift in the AML ecosystem. We are now one of the very few companies which have active client engagements as well as presented to regulators. Through our product, we are confident to create a positive impact in the society by stopping financial crime and making this world a better place. Thank you.
Fabulous. So that's Tiki-Taki. You can follow up with them. They are attending the event. Abhishek is here, so you can set up a virtual chat or meeting with Abhishek, and I'm sure he will be happy to tell you more about how they can help you. Okay, so let's move on to the first live stream. We're going to be hearing from Bill Hauserman of Bureau van Dijk. So if Bill can join me, welcome to Bill. Bill is Senior Director of Compliance Solutions at Bureau van Dijk. He joined the company in 2016 after 12 years designing global compliance and ethics programs for SAI Global and Navex Global. Bill is focused on anti-corruption compliance solutions. For his sins, he has spent the last 10 years focused primarily on the perplexing problem of creating efficient due diligence technology and content for understanding the risks of customers and business partners. Welcome, Bill. Good to see you again. And I'm going to hand over to you for your keynote. Does your due diligence program meet the challenges of emerging regulations? Thanks, Bill.
Great, and thank you, Andrew, and thank you, A-Team. This is, I know it's more difficult to have these virtually, but on the other hand, you're handling them quite well. And so we definitely look forward to being able to sponsor more in the future. We had an interesting Q&A session on Monday where we had several of us together, and some of you may have seen this, but one of the questions that came out was, what is your top emerging regulation or new regulation that you care about? And the most of the answers in the whole alphabet soup of regulations, particularly new ones, really dealt with the internal operations after you have acquired customers or maybe suppliers or maybe distributors, and they're quite specific. The regulations that we're seeing emerge and are new really dive into details that frankly most other regulations until this time haven't gone that specific, except in the operational areas. And that's more or less supporting the legal and the audit side. How I'm coming at this is that we have gotten so specific and the regulators have gotten so specific as well about what they want done in these new regulations that there has been a lapse, I believe, in what I'll call the holistic regulations that started all this 10, 15 years ago that focused on how you actually bring a relationship into your organization, be it a client or a supplier or a distributor or the like, any business partner relationship. And so what I'm going to focus on today, and my definition of emerging regulations is the older regulations that have had much more specific guidance. If we could have the next slide, please. And specific guidance has been what has been driving, frankly, the last nearly 10 years of just the direction that we have been getting. And if I go all the way back to the original, what really motivated a lot of current due diligence and due diligence needs, and how we got to this anti-money laundering and financial crime detection is such a hot topic. It really started with the bribery and corruption, because that was the era of Siemens, where $850 billion FCPA violation on top of another $1 billion, 850 million on top of $1 billion of cost. That was the time when people really started to wake up, and yet the guidance was almost non-existent. It was just a whole bunch of regulation type speak and nothing that really told us how did that actually impact my operations. And then we evolved into much more specific guidance as we got through into the anti-money laundering, where money laundering in general is the vehicle that crimes can live by. They can't exist without it. And that's where we saw the migration into the current directives out of the EU as well as the OFAC guidance, which OFAC guidance uses words like calibration. No one had been talking about calibration in the past, but on May 2nd of 2019, those words started to be used by the regulators, and the expectations of this prescriptive environment just increased significantly. So with the 6th money laundering directive out of the EU, what we're now seeing is a stake in the ground on what really has to be examined if you're going to slow down or stop. Slow down would be great. Money laundering, because the 22 predicate offenses that they're calling out, and they've just added 6 new ones from prior, but they're calling out the offenses that can't exist without the ability to launder the proceeds of those offenses. So that is a whole different level where we've gone through 10 years of increasing sophistication of the guidance, and that has to change our mindset about how we've looked at programs. And one of the big pieces to this is that all due diligence at the front end is risk-based, but is risk-based, has that kept up with some of the brand new regulations that are affecting operations? Has that process kept up? And if I could have the next slide, because risk-based approach is critical, but the traditional approach hasn't been re-examined in light of new technologies and information that is available that frankly wasn't even available 3 years ago. So obviously there's the external drivers are the regulatory and the reputational environment. And then there's internal, which is what's your risk appetite? Too often though, I'm seeing in organizations we work with that the risk appetite has been replaced by cost appetite. And you can't, the cost and the risk detection has in the past always been mutually exclusive. You had to spend more if you wanted to find more risks. The emerging environment will change that dynamic. And when it changes that dynamic, we'd have to re-examine the enterprise risk assessment process and how well that is actually done, because that's where we're seeing many of the deficiencies is if you take across the board, banks for one, but corporations, and then there's corporations who woke up on January 1st of 2020 and before, and had knock at the door and said, hey, you're a bank now because most of your revenue is coming through a store. And that changed the dynamic in the corporations as well. So now everybody is more or less, as we roll forward, going to be under the same type of scrutiny. And those detailed regulations in the back office that are very prescriptive will always be focused on banking versus non-banking. But the whole approach to due diligence and of creating relationships, onboarding clients, for instance, that has to change from this traditional approach. If we go to the next slide. And so we're moving, and you see a lot of this in the technology, client life cycle management. Well, we've been talking for a few years that if you can move from risk-based approach to due diligence, where you are treating starting new relationships differently based on the presumed risk, if you do that, you are by definition going to miss things. And because if you don't perform a certain level of due diligence into a certain depth, you're never going to find to the level of, say, the 6th AML directive, where they're asking you to be able to say that you have looked at 22 areas of corruption and crime that are very specific. And so I think that the life cycle is not that you're abandoning a risk-based approach, because there's still a cost factor here, but the cost of going deeper and with less noise, less false positives to find hidden risks, that's the challenge. And that challenge is being met today by data and technology. And it will explode. And because of the cost of that is coming down, it will explode over the next few years. So finding hidden risks by filtering out the noise of false positives is happening now. And the pressure's still the same. regulatory and reputational risk. And the solution is really smart technology that's properly calibrated, that harnesses the vast amount of information that I'll get to in a second. But that move to life cycle due diligence is still risk-based, but you are going deeper on everyone, regardless of what the relationship is, because if you don't, you're not going to find the hidden risks. And then if you could go to the next slide, please. The way that this is done, and you've had lots of sessions this week on the technology, the reg tech around making this work. But what you have to realize, and what you all have said this week and in past conferences, is the traditional, the technologies that we have today, the legacy technologies, we can't just do a wholesale restart like a fintech who's starting from scratch and has that luxury of not having legacy. But banking, for instance, definitely, and the large corporations who are acting like banks because of their leasing operations, for instance, they have to bolt on new technologies, new approaches, so that they cover off the gaps we've got now. So, for instance, in our world, the way we look at the life cycle due diligence, if you don't identify the third party customer, supplier, et cetera, if you don't identify them on as many dimensions as possible, all the technology in the world is useless. So first you identify and validate, and there are sessions, the next session we'll talk about some of that. But what that does is it allows you to merge data sets, the third parties disclosures, your internal data sets and external data sets, both regulatory and commercial, and those are all blended. And now you know for a very high degree of certainty, above 99%, that this is the person or entity I'm working with. Then you can start your due diligence. Because if you haven't done that front end, what I saw in the past was that much of that back end, the due diligence piece, started well before the identification and validation was done. What did that lead to? A lot of false positives, because I didn't even have the right name to be able to match it against something as structured as a OFAC list. So on the due diligence side, we've got risk assessment is made up now of vast amounts of structured information like sanctions and political exposure, the structured adverse media, that if you're going to do 22 predicate offenses, you're not going to find it on the sanctions and political exposure side. You're going to find it because you don't get to that. You don't get to a sanctions list until there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of references to your misdeeds on the unstructured side. So, and then that unstructured information gets turned into structured information over time. And technologies are helping on the left to merge the data, and on the right to create the content, the structured content that now feeds this massive machine learning and artificial intelligence universe that is providing far clearer direction to the analysts. And it's the analysts we're trying to support. Today, they do way too much data discovery in order to then spend 5% of their time making a decision, and they're always hurried. What we want to do is make it 100% of the time it's decisioning, and it's because the flow of information is far more accurate. And you don't have to do this whole thing all at once. What you can do is bolt pieces on, bolt that front end on. If you don't do that, downstream is not going to be an efficient process. And you can bolt on different due diligence pieces. And there's lots of vendors who can talk to this, and they will work within your legacy systems. Eventually, though, there's got to be a cultural change at the board level that says, you know what, let's actually slow down money laundering. And to do that, boards are going to have to invest. But the last point I'll leave you with is the ROI that you can present on doing this activity right is significant in both risk reduction and cost reduction. And that's novel. And that's because the data and the technology can support people better. So on that, I just appreciate you listening in, and I will turn it back to Andrew.
Bill, thank you. Thanks so much. Great presentation. A really good bit of perspective for me was what you mentioned without money laundering. That's the thing that makes all this crime possible. It's like the wire fraud of institutional financial crime in a way. Anyway, we've got a few questions from the audience for you. Very specific one here. Do you think the industry is ready for AML6, and what are the potential problem areas for compliance?
So I look at AML6 as a little bit like 2008, and OFAC says we've got a 50% rule. Nobody could do it for 8 years. I mean, literally do it right. I mean, the banks ignored it, and they should, because OFAC couldn't tell them what the answer was. So I think AML6 is the same thing. It's driving two factors. One is you have to go deeper, and you have to go deeper on everybody if we're going to find the hidden risks, because the bad actors are extremely good at hiding and in masking their cash production and legal entities from their holding companies and from them. And so that's why you have to go deeper. But if you get false positives out of it and are drowning, then it's not sustainable. So that's where we had to solve the false positives problem simultaneously. I believe more banks and corporations will dabble in adverse media detection. That's where the hidden stuff is, both the structured and unstructured. As they dabble in that, and they start to literally segment by the 22 predicate offenses, then we will get adoption. That's probably 2 to 3 years away, even as it's supposed to be, it's effective mid next year.
Very good, thank you. Little sort of stepping back a bit, you seem to be saying the regulators are being more prescriptive and sophisticated in their rulemaking. Are they equipped to handle more complex responses from regulated entities?
What I've seen is regulators have stepped up and said 3 years ago, they said, whoa, we're clueless. We can't even hold a conversation with those we are regulating because of the lack of sophistication of the dialogue. And that was around technology and information to try to solve some of these problems. But the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK really led that charge to try to bring the two groups together, the regulator and the regulated, and start these tech sprints which allow technology to be the dialogue between the two. And all this fear that was surrounded 3 years ago, AI and just its application, and how are you going to do that? It's a black box. All of these things all got discussed, and in many cases, all of the exceptions got blown away. That this stuff actually, it's not a black box. You can describe exactly what the components are. You just have to do it right. And the learning models are about people educating those. And if you don't have the right education parse, it's not going to do any good. So I think the regulators and those they regulate now, the dialogue is much better, which has allowed those prescriptive regulations to continue. It's like OFAC in 2008. They didn't have a clue how anybody was going to adhere to the 50% rule. They did it, and then 8 years later, it was doable.
Worked. Okay, a couple of sort of forward-looking questions now. In what areas are you seeing automation make the most difference? And do you expect this to change over the next year or so?
The biggest difference has been, and we'll talk about it later, but this whole area of knowing who you're dealing with, because even if it's a company is run by people. At the end of the day, you've got to know the people, and there wasn't an easy way. But now technologies, I mean, if we can if we can load a 787 jumbo jet without passports, because I use facial recognition, if we can do that, which is now done routinely, why can't we just put that at the front end? And let's talk about privacy and all those other issues. But that's the main area that is available today, but not readily operational, because I think that many of the cases the banks are worried about privacy, but those who have realize the privacy issues can be well contained. So that's the one area, it's the onboarding and the front end, and it's the people who call the shots. That's the important piece. If you don't have that, if you don't know them and know their backgrounds and have dug deep, they can get away. I mean, think of the billions that flow through banks and billions that flow through corporations.
Very good. Last question. and this one relates to, going back to the life cycle due diligence you talked about, how far can that due diligence you describe be applied to emerging areas like ESG?
ESG is a different data set, but is identical. This is the issue, that the technologies that are allowing us to better understand who a person is, a company is, and then get our arms around that relationship better. It's the exact same technologies if you have the data that the technologies can analyze. And so, at my company, massive effort in the ESG space because everybody's asking for it, and it's the expectation is that it's not just about sanctions and PEP and adverse media anymore. It's the universe of risks, and they're all colliding together in a positive way. But the massive data that's taking, people can't do that. It's got to be the reg tech that's going to bolt it all together with high degree of accuracy and advise. Then that technology advises people, and that's the analysts who make the decisions. But I think that's the area that I don't see a whole lot of difference in how you would, and actually in many of the applications that deal with ESG, it's what's the difference between anti-bribery, corruption, or AML or trade? I mean, they're all at the foundation of on board. It's all the same.
Very much, very much so. Thank you, Bill. Fabulous presentation. Thanks for your answers. Thanks for sharing your expertise. You're going to be hanging around and joining us in a little while, I think. Let's see. Before we go to the next session, we're going to have another RegTech startup elevator pitch. This one is from Sedici, who also have a 1-minute video to showcase their offering. So here it comes.
Hi everyone, my name is Rob Leslie. I'm the CEO and founder of Sedici, and today I'm going to talk to you very quickly about PREXA. Money laundering, fraud, terrorist financing are crimes that affect the world. Every year, about $2 trillion is laundered through the financial systems of the world, and they affect every single person on the planet. We've developed advanced cryptography that allows banks to work together in a collaborative fashion to identify fraud and illegal transactions by looking at the data both of the banks have when they're involved in a payment, in a manner where neither side exposes their data to the other side. Everything is kept private and confidential, but we're still able to get a risk score out of the solution. It is PREXA. It's called pre-execution alerting, and it is our solution to anti-money laundering around the world.
Thank you to Sedici there. As always, you can follow up with them. They are here on the event. You can hook up with Rob Leslie. He's around, he's attending the event. That you can connect through chat or through a virtual meeting. I'm sure I'll be happy to tell you more. So that's Sedici there. So let's move on to the next session. We have a panel now, digitizing onboarding, KYC and AML with RegTech. This very much follows on from what Bill was talking about. Happy that moderating duties will be handled by my friend Lorraine Waters. Welcome, Lorraine. Lorraine, of course, is former CDO for compliance at HSBC. Now apparently retired, but here she is. She's, as I say, she's most recently been managing director and CDO for global compliance at HSBC, where she ran industry-leading data management practice according to the regulators, and has won many industry awards and accolades, including a CDO of the Year for 2018, our own Data Management Practitioner of the Year for 2019, ended her career on a high point there, Lorraine. And she was in 2020, oh, I guess we got topped here, she was listed in the top 100 global data power women. Recently retired, but now working on the boards of 2 UK charities for their data strategies, as well as working part-time advising a couple of UK banks on their financial crime data strategies. Doesn't sound much like retiring, but here we are. Welcome, Lorraine. Looking forward to our long overdue lunch soon. Good luck with the panel.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And yes, retirement has been pretty busy. And thank you for the introduction. I don't need to go into too much more. As Andrew said, for the last 5 years, I've been Chief Data Officer for Financial Crime and Regulatory Compliance at HSBC. And I'm joined by a very illustrious panel who I will get to introduce themselves. But we're going to talk about the digitizing of onboarding, KYC and AML with RegTech. So first up, hopefully you've all tuned into the last presentation from Bill Houseman. I thought it was an excellent presentation, and it's a top tip for the practitioners amongst us. You need to keep close to your data vendors. They know what's going on in the industry, and Bill and his peers in the industry will always be able to help you to understand what initiatives are out there, that horizon scanning piece. So, Bill, I don't know if you want to say anything else to introduce yourself to anybody who may not have been on the last session.
Oh, thanks, Lorraine. It's in my role, I just work with lots of companies all over the world. We're global. I lead the global practice group for Bureau van Dijk Moody's. And as part of Moody's, we have access now to many more resources and just best practices. And so that's really what my role is to try to just understand what they are, bring them to our clients, and inform our implementations.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. And John, if you also want to introduce yourself, your primary responsibilities and your particular interest in RegTech.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Osei-Kweku. I'm the head of customer due diligence for Bank of China. Been there 3.5 years now. I was actually recruited 3.5 years ago to build the whole function, as it did not exist at the time. And so it's been a very long journey. And through that, I have aged considerably, I think. Nonetheless, I'm responsible for overlooking non-corporates and, non-personal entities and FIs as well. So the scope of what I do is actually writing all the procedures from the policy, and also looking after the onboarding team, the periodic reviews team, and essentially the trigger events as well. Throw in a bit of the MiFID classification, EMIR as well. So it is pretty busy on a day-to-day basis. Yes.
Thank you, John. Excellent.
Thank you.
Anthony, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your primary responsibilities.
Yeah, so Anthony, I'm Digital Project Director and Innovation and Watch Leader for Société Générale Wholesale. And more recently, since now 2 years, I'm working on the innovation department, and especially focused on blockchain, DLT, and privacy enhancing technology. And since I joined this department, actually, I'm very close to all the regulators in regards of AML, CTF, and how this kind of new technology can help the financial industry to tackle financial crime and AML.
Thank you, Anthony. And Antoine, last but not least, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, Lorraine. I'm thrilled to be with you today. I'm CEO of Flaminem, which is a software vendor that provides KYC software to automate the due diligence of the onboarding and the KYC process. We're specifically specialized and optimized for those who deal with corporate customers, such as private equity, investment banks, and corporate banks.
Excellent. Thank you, Anton. And hopefully you can all agree that we have a great mix here of practitioners and technologists and data vendors. So we're looking forward to an interesting discussion. Can I ask the audience, so I want to draw your attention to the Slido poll that we're running at the moment. Some of you have already figured that out and have given us your answers. But the question that we're asking are, what are your top KYC and AML risks and challenges? we are now facing in the new digitized environment. So the proposed or suggested answers are reliance on manual or paper-based processes, customer and identity verification, managing cybercrime, improving AML monitoring systems and keeping up with AML typologies, and keeping up with regulatory obligations. So we will look at the poll answers shortly, but I'll give you a few moments to actually vote on what you believe are the top risks and challenges while I'm asking the first question. So to the panel. So this year we've seen real acceleration, real progress in the digitization and automation of the KYC and onboarding processes. Although looking at the questions that are topping the poll at the moment, people's top challenge is actual paper-based and manual processes. So maybe not everybody is seeing this acceleration in digitization and automation of KYC. But we know that any improvements in the KYC process, the onboarding process, improves our chances of preventing and detecting financial crime. And Bill referenced that in his presentation earlier on as well, the whole concept of, going deep as you onboard a customer and then that continuous or perpetual KYC cycle. So what can our panelists tell us about these improvements in their organizations or indeed in the industry? And what is exciting them in terms of improved technologies and processes and potentially what's next, that horizon scanning piece I talked about as well. So John, hopefully you can, I'm not picking on you, but hopefully you can start us off with your thoughts on these improvements in your own organization that you've seen and what you think might be next.
Yes, so for us, we had some big plans for 2020, and obviously nobody saw COVID coming. And so what's happened with the impact of COVID is we've had to accelerate some of the changes we wanted to implement. So we have introduced a new system, which is actually on trial at the minute. And that system essentially is looking at the end-to-end life cycle of a client, which will incorporate many facets of it, not just from the onboarding side, but for the periodic reviews and the trigger events that happen, including customer classification, to ensure that if the client wants to do business, a MiFID type of business, that has also been captured during the onboarding process or at a later time, if as and when the need arises. But one of the key things that I'm quite happy about is the digitalization of our reports on clients. In particular, we've created what we call a 360 view of a client, and it keeps on growing because we are trying to add so many other bows to that string to that bow to ensure that at a click of a button, our analysts are able to view the entirety of the customer's history without having to go to so many different systems as we have all experienced in other banks. So that is where we're really focusing our minds on. And at the minute, having to work from home majority of the time, we are starting to see some of the benefits of that approach that we've taken since the turn of the year.
That's excellent. It's great to hear that you've cracked that 360 view. It's a very difficult one. Banks have spent many years building up a single view of customer, when in reality, it's multiple views of the same customer is what you need. So good to hear that you are doing that. And Anthony, if you don't mind me jumping to you, same question to you, because I know certainly you have been involved in some of the industry initiatives around improving automation around KYC and AML.
Mm-hmm. So sure. So what we see is we also have a growing global recognition of the value of data and how important it is to prioritize data, privacy, and security as a critical cornerstone of business operation. And for financial industry, one of the big challenges is the client reference data. So we all know how time consuming and how costly it is to maintain our referential data quality. But thanks to new technology, such as privacy enhancing technology, the PT, it is now possible to measure the quality of clients' data with our peers by anonymization and encryption of all data, avoid costly third parties to centralize check, and finally reduce our internal maintenance cost. So at Société Générale, we are part of a consortium of banks and data providers where the solution proposed is to benchmark reference data quality with our peers without revealing the source and by encrypting the data. And this initiative is called DANI. So briefly, how does it work? So it's a group of banks and data providers who decide to measure the quality of their clients' reference data based on the matching key. And for our first use case, we will use the LEI, the legal entity identifier, as a matching key. So participants can benchmark all the data fields linked to each LEI, such as, for example, the full legal name, the BIC code, the company address, or the NACE code, for example. And to participate, you just need to create an account on the DANI platform. And it has been designed very user-friendly with a web application, and no particular skills are required. So each participant just needs to extract from their database a list of LEI with their respective data field in an Excel file, drag and drop it into the platform, and upload to the DANI reconciliation service. Of course, each data field has to respect the format that is defined by the platform. Participation are kept anonymized and data remains encrypted at all times. So depending on how large your data set is, it takes from seconds to a minute to get a report showing if you are in a full consensus with your peers and where you have anomalies. So we've already done 2 proof of concept this year. So one in January and one in June. And overall feedback from participants is very positive, and we managed to process over 200,000 of LEI on more than 30 data fields with 3 banks and 3 data providers on the second POC. The technical solution is provided by London-based fintech RegTech called Secretariat, which use a privacy-enhancing technology called confidential computing. In regards of this initiative, where do we stand? We've done already a virtual summit organized last month in October, at which around 15 financial institutions did participate. The aim was to really introduce DANI to a wider community of financial institutions and to onboard them in this consortium. And since October, we are working with the consortium and new financial institutions on another data set, which is focused on the KYC AML one.
That's absolutely fascinating, Anthony, and potentially a game changer. So Project DANI, you mentioned, that's D-A-N-I-E?
D-A-N-I-E, correct, yeah.
Excellent. So if people on the call wanted to find out more about that, could they Google it and find out some more?
Unfortunately, not yet. But actually, you can get it on LinkedIn. Especially, we're organizing, the consortium of DANI is organizing a workshop on the 25th of November, where we'll discuss about all the use cases linked to the KYC AML one. So, all the financial institutions, even data providers that are interested to be part of the workshop and to bring on all the use cases based on this technology, definitely they are welcome and to join.
And clearly privacy enhancing technologies, or PETs, there are many providers of PETs technologies that people can look into. And certainly within some organizations that I have been working with, even internally, that's a game changer. Being able to share data between jurisdictions that previously would have had restrictions. So it's definitely an exciting thing to have a look at for the people on this call if they haven't started to do that already. So that's excellent. So I think we're going to have a little look at the poll results now. And just to remind you, the question was, what are the top KYC and AML risks and challenges we're now facing? And surprisingly, and a little bit sadly, it's the reliance on manual and paper-based processes, which is, we're talking about digitizing, we're talking about the progress being made, but people still feel that there is the top concern is reliance on manual and paper-based processes, and by quite a long margin. So for my panel, do any of the results surprise you here? I'm not going to pick on any one of you if you want to sort of jump in here and have a look at those.
Well, yeah, Lorraine, if you allow me, it's it's quite impressive, in fact, to see this result on reliance on manual/paper-based processes. Had the question been something like reliance on inefficient, siloed processes, then I would probably understand. But here we're still at the paper-based processes. We're still at the manual bit. So I'm in a sense somehow thrilled as a software vendor of KYC automation.
The opportunity is there, Antoine.
Yeah, I think I have golden years ahead of me. So that's a good thing. However, it's interesting to see that managing cybercrime is 11% only. I mean, this is probably because our audience is more on KYC and AML one. But if you look at cybercrime is $170 billion market as opposed to $15 billion for AML. A very recent research came out from Accenture says that 68% of business leaders have cybercrime on top of their mind, and 62% really experience risk breach of data. That's quite a lot. I mean, so it's surprising to see it at the bottom of our list.
Yeah,
so that's
as a practitioner, Antoine, and John and Anthony will probably back me up on this as well. I think that question has been answered from a different perspective. You know, cybercrime is not always sitting alongside financial crime in a financial institution. Yeah, so it's looked on as typically more of a technology problem than a bad actor problem.
Yeah, that's exactly true. So the question, the answers really reflect our audience and our what's top of mind.
Exactly. So so I think this topic then obviously is pertinent to the people on this call, because if manual and paper-based processes are their top challenges, we need to help them to see what is out there in terms of automation and digital capabilities that they can develop to help them better manage KYC and AML.
Lorraine,
yes.
Can I just jump in there? I don't think this is actually quite surprising from my perspective, being a practitioner. We often find different systems being introduced, but most of the time, some of these systems are not designed in conjunction with practitioners. So you can often find that they are swanky systems, and technically on paper, they look perfect, but in practice, they don't work. And what people end up doing is going back to what they know best, which is paper-based. And practitioners are tired of paper because you do lose paper. And we all wish that we will be in a position whereby we have a fantastic, well, it doesn't need to be fantastic. It needs to be a practical working solution, digital solution, which is actually not 100% based on efficiency, which is where a lot of the time things go wrong. But this is not very surprising at all. This is where I believe the industry is at the minute.
And to be honest, even with my own experience, and I see Anthony nodding as well, more often than not, when you onboard the client, you collect all the data you need, and you usually record it correctly in the onboarding system. But by the time the data starts flowing through the transaction systems, the payment systems, et cetera, into the transaction monitoring systems, it's been, data gets corrupted or dropped or changed or mangled somehow. So trying to trace the data back to when it was correct is quite difficult. So a lot of emphasis needs to be put on improved system controls, I believe, and improved change controls. And that's, what we need to work with our IT colleagues and our architecture colleagues to tighten up, because usually the data is right when we onboard it, but by the time it gets to the monitoring systems, it ain't. So something to think about, and I see people nodding vigorously, so that's good. Okay, good. So one of the other questions we asked about was the response to the regulators. But how do we feel the regulators are responding? And are regulators' expectations supportive? As Bill mentioned in his presentation, the FCA coming to the table with a tech sprint, or are they challenging in this new automated digital AI cloud environment? And can you give any examples other than the FCA of best practice where you might have seen it? So Antoine, I think we'll start with you from a software perspective, and if you've been working with any of the regulators on that.
Yeah, Lorraine, yeah, from a vendor perspective, I can't give you a best practice that our users experience with their regulators. But what we see, in a sense, as observers of our users, is that they all feel that gone are the days where the regulators used to be a caring guide to them in the implementation of regulations. They now become more and more of auditors, controllers, and sanction issuers. So they now are more dreaded more than before. Regulators have recently issued also some warnings, which are now top of mind of our users and customers, mainly to adjust their systems and to strengthen their vigilance in an appropriate manner in this particular context of the global health crisis. That's one thing we observe. In France, the bank authority last year carried out something like 34 on-site inspections and initiated 8 disciplinary proceedings and issued 8 formal notices during the year of 2019 alone. That's quite a lot. So people are now very they take, as Bill said it earlier, in his introductory speech, things are now to be taken extremely seriously. We as vendors, we welcome the EU latest announcement, which dates back to May, that announced an action plan for a comprehensive EU policy on preventing money laundering and terrorist financing Europe-wide. And that's really good because so far, up till now, we've had an AML6, AML5, AML4, but we never had a single EU rule book. So while current EU rules are far-reaching and effective, member states tend to apply them in a very wide variety of different manners. So the diverging interpretations of the rules lead to loopholes and lead that can be exploited by criminals and also lead to difficulties in implementing AML and KYC procedures transnationally, across borders.
So I think what you're saying is they are both supportive in terms of giving better guidance now, and
yes,
book, but also challenging in terms of
the small ones. I mean, when we talk about small customers like a national private equity, they don't care so much, but private equities who have offices in London and Luxembourg, they care a lot. Banks, major banks who are transnational by nature, they welcome this very well. But I leave our bankers here to speak to it. But that's how we see things going.
That's true, and that kind of leads us on to the conversation we were having earlier. So what trends are the panel seeing around use of digital identity technology? Bill, you mentioned, for example, ID&V being done at a later stage. You think should be done at an earlier stage. So how do you expect the technology around digital identity to evolve?
In what I'm seeing is the recognition that there isn't a conflict between privacy and ID&V, because you have to get through that first, because it'll still be some of the information, your name, your date of birth, and your address is still personal, but it is becoming normal that you can't do anything. You can't get a mortgage, you can't open a bank account unless you can provide at least that. And the difference between having just a name, when you try to match it against billions of pieces of information and triangulate on a date of birth and an address, and it's from an official document. So what I'm seeing is that everybody's starting to recognize that my own internal data sets are wrong. Well, why don't I step back and implement this? And remember that the privacy element can be handled by the vendor, so that you're not holding all of those documents. You're getting the net result, which is a name that's real, the address that's on the official document, and you're getting a date of birth. And if you have those three things, it's amazing what artificial intelligence can do and the machine learning. So, but most today, most banks are getting that information. Most corporations are not. And that's a real problem when you take that across all of the owners, directors, and managers of a legal entity. How do you get all of that information? That's where the ID&V is allowed the smartphone to become the geolocator and the collection of the facial recognition and the document. And that's just a conduit. And then the privacy issue is dealt with at the vendor, and the bank or corporation gets back those three pieces of data. And now there's other data you can get to, as well as the numbers, but that gets into, some don't want to house that, because I think the technologies now, if you can get those top three, that's why, most of the no-fly list is, you've got to get that information right, and then everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, exactly, and the sanctions list as well. But I think it's a sad state of affairs when the banks have to go to the vendors to get that kind of information when on their own customers or their customers. So, but it isn't easy. All the legacy technologies that a lot of the financial services firms have built up over the years, the issues with restrictions by jurisdiction. So it can be a problem that the vendors can help solve. So, John, I don't know if you want to give us some insight into how you see the use of digital identity technology improving the process to authenticate individuals.
I think from an efficiency perspective, it will improve end-to-end immeasurably, and everyone would love it. But there is a bigger problem here, and the problem is taking it back to basics, which is the data collection in itself. Banks, FIs have to essentially determine what their own policies are and ensure that they are adhering to their own policies. So if your policy says that you must collect X, Y, and Z data on each individual or entity, then you must adhere to your own policy. That data gathered will then feed into your data sets. So the old saying of rubbish in, rubbish out will be determined by how fastidiously you apply your own rules. I think the challenger banks are doing a better job in doing that, because they've embraced technology straight from get-go. So they're doing a better job. I know for instance, a friend of mine has gone and opened an account with one of the new challenger banks, and it took a number of minutes, and he did not have to go into a branch. And that is because the challenger banks don't necessarily have branches, so they're forced into doing that. Whereas traditional banks have got branches, and they'll obviously tell you to go into a local branch and do that. That slows down the whole process, so on and so forth. The last thing I would say as well is the fact that some entities some directors in certain corporates have got this idea that giving their data out to a bank, which is regulated, is actually breach of their own privacy, which is nonsense. And the bank will therefore have to take a stronger stance. But at times, banks are obviously not willing to do that, because then they could compromise that relationship. And then the easiest option would be to put a waiver in place or to put an exception in place. Then the exception becomes the norm. So your data sets will eventually be rendered useless. So you have to go back to basics. You have to have a clear idea what your policy is, and then make sure that you stick to the policy, and your exceptions should be very few and not the norm.
Yeah. May I add, Lorraine, may I add one item that is now extremely, I find it that it's a kind of a breakthrough biometric technology that does what we call the no-name screening. That's screening not against databases of names of people, but screening against photographic databases of high-risk individuals. And that's extremely important, because then you can do the no-name screening without the chronic problems of alphanumeric screening, with problems of disambiguation, false positives, and missing identifiers. And
I think you're right. I think, and that sometimes comes back then to the argument of could we, should we? Yes, we could use, facial recognition technology. Bill mentioned it as well, but should we? It's a special category of data, and the privacy considerations need to be taken.
Well, Lorraine, I don't know about the US, because Bill had some qualms about this, but in Europe, I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but AML regulation takes precedence over GDPR ones. And that's, it's important to keep in mind, because that's, we're here talking about counterfeiting of terrorism. So we're not talking about only just private, domestic privacy issues.
Yeah, it's worth saying that that's not a blanket statement that AML takes precedence over GDPR. It needs to be taken into consideration. Having been responsible for regulatory compliance and financial crime, trust me, it's not always the case. But we need to move quickly on, if that's okay. I think, Anthony covered some really interesting points around privacy enhancing technologies as well. So that's something to consider there. But the last point, we mentioned earlier that improving KYC onboarding, so at the beginning of the relationship, improves all of the monitoring and screening upstream. So for transaction monitoring, in its current form, it's been described as trying to find a needle in a haystack of needles. So anybody who's been involved in AML transaction monitoring will recognize how difficult it actually can be. Is there a better way, in your view, to detect dodgy transactions? For example, using an intelligence-led approach rather than the transaction by transaction approach? And what do we need to see from the regulators to facilitate this change? So Anthony or Bill, I don't know if you have Anthony or John, from a practitioner perspective, if you have a view on that.
Yes, this is something that I'm quite passionate about, because I believe that it all starts with asking the right questions, and having the attitude of trying to adhere to the rules and mitigate potential risk. I say this because a lot of people think this is a given. However, I think there is the majority of people, or a lot of people, have got an attitude of let's tick a box. Let's do what we're supposed to do, as opposed to let's do what we have to do and go the extra mile. So know your customer. We talk about know your customer, which is critical, but that tends to be on the hard facts of have you identified the entity, the ownership, so on and so forth. Then you need to move on to the know your business. Do you know your customer's business? Do you know your customer's customers? Do you know where the customer operates, the jurisdictions? what transactional monitoring, what type of transactions are they going to be engaged in, activity levels, the amount of money that will be coming in, going out. Now, once you have a very good understanding and in-depth view of the client, you will then be able to build in your algorithms, which will then pick up the right information. Where I think technology meets AML is technology is going to be able to have specific good algorithms, which would then extract the right sort of information for the analyst to actually analyze. I believe that a lot of analysts, Bill said at the beginning that the data discovery stage is huge, which is true, because analysts will end up becoming research analysts as opposed to analyzing data and making a decision. So in short, I think that the right information, knowing your customer's business, not just a little bit about it, but knowing an in-depth bit of the customer's business is what's ultimately going to drive everything. And then technology will take on the mundane rigmarole of researching, and then the analyst will sit down and be able to actually focus on making decisions based on the good information that technology has been able to present for them.
Absolutely. And Anthony, I presume you would agree with that. It's all about the data. It's all about the quality data. We can't rely on the rules-based technologies to spit out, false positives, alerts, etc. We need to be looking at improving the quality of the data and how we analyze it.
Right. And especially, I think I rejoin John in regards of in terms of technology, and especially for privacy enhancing technology one, by allowing secure and compliant sharing would allow each actor to speed up their investigation, refine the quality of their suspicious activity report, the SAR, and reduce the false positive in order to be more efficient. So in this way, we can create a kind of network between banks where each bank can quickly share data on clients' transactions without revealing sensitive data to beat the money laundering network one. But there is only two main challenges that we may have for transaction monitoring one within the AML-CTF framework is the legacy, the policy and regulatory issue, which may affect the use of this technology, especially when we're talking about data sharing across multiple jurisdictions. And same as for Danny, it will be the same issue. So besides the value of PET technology, committing enough banks at the same time to get over some overlaps and make the analysis more efficiently is a challenge. So it's really something that we see technology can use, but we have, to go deeper, make a deep dive on other jurisdictions that will allow us to share our data for transaction monitoring. And at the same time, we need to have kind of a minimum of banks to be onboarded, to be able to exchange all the data and try to get any, some result, which is more efficient in some analysis. This one also, it's kind of a challenge for collaborative data sharing, can say.
Exactly, and the number of reg techs out there that can help with this, it doesn't have to be an in-house built solution within banks. We see the reg techs coming up some incredibly innovative capabilities, and so it's worth discussing, getting involved in the forum, the industry forum, obviously as well, but looking at some of these technologies that you can use to help you with that particular problem. Okay, so I think we're coming towards the end of our time. I'm getting nudged. So, Bill, could we have just a quick comment from you before we go to Slido in terms of top takeaways and how the practitioners on this call can collaborate with RegTechs?
Yeah, I think this is a journey and it's not a sprint. So, and I think the next 3 years are going to be revolutionary. I mean, John was spot on. If we have that information, the technology is going to do wonderful things. So just pace yourself, get the board involved in understanding where to get the funding, where this can take you, and that there is positive ROI on this.
Excellent, thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to move to the Q&A session because we have got quite a lot of questions that have come in. So one of the top questions, and Anthony, people are very interested to hear about this industry initiative that's using privacy enhancing technology. Next steps for this, you said that you had done a couple of proof of concepts this year. Is the plan to roll it out to more participants or to publish your results?
Yep, definitely. This is the idea with the consortium. It's really we've done already some proof of concept on one use cases is data quality of our referential data. The second one that we are working now with the consortium and also with new banks, it's on the KYC AML. And of course, thanks to the scalability of the technology of privacy enhancing technology and also provided by the RegTech Secretariat, we'll be able also to bring other use cases within, the financial sector. So it's something that most of the banks worldwide are quite interested to be part of and to bring their use cases. So we are quite open because it's important to have the more banks onboarded in this kind of solution. And it's really something that for the next step we want is to really bring this presentation, Danny's project, to a wider community for them to know better how scalability is this platform is and the service as well.
That's fascinating. And, I think we could do a whole session on this. And, maybe Andrew, if he's on the call, can arrange for the next A-Team event to do a full session. You could bring your results back to the audience to see how you're getting on.
And I will be able also to make some demo on the platform to show you how it works and how fast we can get a report. And this is something banks are looking for.
Excellent. So we have another question here that is asked. We want to upgrade our KYC program but face resistance from the business on further investment. What should we be looking for in a robust KYC solution, and any tips on justifying the value of investing in KYC solutions? Now, Bill, you talked about having an irrefutable ROI to improving the processes around KYC and onboarding. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How you see, how did you come up with that ROI?
So first, it takes effort before you can ever even buy anything. You have to be able to analyze the existing data sets and match them against the sources of truth. So that's what Bureau van Dijk provides. And when we have a gap, we have to fill that gap. But it's that gives you an analysis of how much more depth can I actually get to. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't work downstream to do the due diligence piece, but that's step one. Now I know what John was talking about, far more about the people, the companies and the people who actually run them and manage them. So that's step one. And then step two is, now how do I take, I had a legal entity, maybe I had one owner before, and now I got 10. So now I have many more names. So my whole volume has gone up. So now you apply technology, smart technologies, to compare that to the negative information down to the adverse media level, particularly for AML6, the 22 predicate offenses. You got to get to that level. And then now all of a sudden, and to John's point again, that analyst is now a decision maker around real risks, making decisions in seconds versus minutes, hours, or days. That impacts, that's time. It's basically time. And so it's not saying that people get out of the way. People are much more effective. They go deeper. And that's the key, is it's not about eliminating people. It's about making people more effective, because if we don't get the people to make the decisions about who the bad actors are faster, then it's just not, we won't make a dent in the problem of AML, of money laundering.
I think as well, you can't just focus the whole ROI or the business case on the risk. You've got to remember that KYC is not just about AML, it's also about understanding what additional business we can do with the customer. So improving your KYC systems is actually increasing your opportunities for revenue. And certainly that's what the business wants to hear, rather than the potential for fines or compliance with the regulation. They obviously want to hear that as well.
Exactly. Lorraine, one major European bank once told us they had they spend 67 days on average to onboard an enterprise customer. And that's too much. I mean, that's too costly in terms of internal processes, of course, but mainly in terms of image, brand image, in terms of churn, loss of revenue, and so on. So that's this is, as you said, is really the heart of the matter. And if you don't take it into account, you will never be able to sell a KYC automation project within the enterprise.
And sadly, that is not untypical, 67 days to onboard a complex legal entity customer, in my experience across a number of the banks. And I'm sure Anthony and John will have seen that in other institutions, not their own, of course.
No, of course.
So I am afraid, everybody, we are actually out of time. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you all for participating, all the panel members. For those who are listening in and for sending in your very pertinent comments. It's been a really good session, and I think something that people are really interested in, and there's certainly, I'm sure, will be follow-ups by Andrew and the A-Team group. So thanks again, and Andrew, I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thanks to all the panelists there. Fabulous session, everyone. I thought that was a really fascinating session. Expertly navigated, orchestrated by a fantastic moderator. Great job all round. On the Project Dani research, I'm sure that our conference producer, Lorna, has taken note of that. And I think it probably does warrant a return session. And we've got a lot of questions that we still didn't get to in this particular session. So I think there's certainly a case for expanding this. Our new platform that we're very pleased with will allow us to nimbly and agilely develop highly targeted mini conferences and briefings and roundtables and so on and so forth. So, that this is something that we hope to bring to market in the coming months. Even if we do come back to doing physical events, we think this sort of a hybrid model can sort of expand the reach of these things. So anyway, fabulous session, everybody. Thank you all. And let me just say a few words to thank everybody, really. We're going to wrap up now for today. Today's been a little bit more compressed than yesterday's marathon session. I think I was on camera for close to 2 hours yesterday, and certainly felt that when I got home. If you missed any session, this is day 4 after all. The recordings for previous sessions are available through the platform. We would urge you to take a look at the agendas and see if there's anything that takes your fancy. You can share with your teams, obviously. So please do take a look. I think they'll be up and available for another day, another 24 hours or so. So please make use of that. Tomorrow sees the 5th and final session. Yes, I will be back. Tomorrow's focus is on maintaining operational resilience to support the new normal environment. Looking forward to hearing about what the new normal really means. So yeah, please join us tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. London. We'll see you all then. Bye-bye now.